Hi, this is RBC Student News. I'm your host, Ava Smith, and today we will be informing you about all of the current news events, both nationally and internationally. To begin this week's broadcast, we are going to start with our world news stories first. We're going to start off with an update on COVID-19. The virus that causes COVID-19 has changed yet again, and experts believe that this strain may be more contagious than the last. Hospitalizations and deaths could reach terrifying peaks all over the world in the next few weeks, but experts believe that the cases are due to traveling after the holiday season, not the new strain. Next up, we will be talking about the Italian government crisis. This crisis was triggered by a withdrawal of government ministers by a former prime minister, Matteo Renzi, who controls a small but critical support in the governing majority. Italy, the first European country to be strongly hit by the virus and among the most devastated by it, is embarking on a vaccination program upon which the nation's hopes rest. Mr. Renzi, a center-left politician, officially announced the resignation of 2 of his ministers. If a new and durable coalition cannot be found, the political crisis could eventually prompt new elections in potentially dangerous conditions and crack the door open to the return of nationalist forces.
Getting fed up with it.
Yeah, I think you are absolutely right. I think the man on the street is actually increasingly fed up with the political, discussion. However, keep in mind that the point that Renzi is making is exactly that you cannot continue as business as usual. I mean, this is an exceptional situation, so you need to introduce exceptional measures.
The next segment we have for you today is news stories regarding the United States. To begin, we're going to talk about the deadly clashes in the U.S. Capitol last week by supporters of President Donald Trump. The persistent threat of populist violence prompted the top officers from each of the military's branches to issue a statement condemning the affirming President-elect Joe Biden's victory in November and inauguration next week. The violent riot in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021 was a direct assault on the U.S. Congress, the Capitol building, and our constitutional process.
As we try to figure out, well, it looks now like the Capitol, the police have been
Pete, let me break away from you a second because things are happening very quickly.
The government did this to us. We were normal, good, law-abiding citizens.
They no longer have been able to keep them back.
Today, we will be talking to one of the rioters. Mr. Bieber, will you please join us? Well, you heard it here first, folks. Some supporters say they went for a peaceful protest and was unsure that they were actually going to storm the Capitol. As you know, there are 2 sides to every story, and we may not truly ever understand why the people stormed the Capitol and what their thoughts and intentions behind doing so were. The next segment we have for you today is why experts and lawmakers say you can't compare the Black Lives Matter protesters to the U.S. Capitol mob. Hours before President Donald Trump was impeached on Wednesday for his role in inciting last week's deadly attack, several lawmakers described the rioters as white supremacists. Rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol building last week, unleashing a wave of comparisons to last year's Black Lives Matter protests. The difference in police response was striking, and there's more that sets them apart. The next segment we have for you today is comparing and contrasting why experts and lawmakers say you can't compare the Black Lives Matter protests to the U.S. Capitol mob. Hours before President Donald Trump was impeached on Wednesday for his role in inciting last week's deadly attack, several lawmakers described the rioters as white supremacists. Rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol building last week, unleashing a wave of comparisons to last year's Black Lives Matter protests. The difference in police response was striking, and there's way more that sets them apart than just that. Convinced that the presidential election was stolen, rioters named themselves patriots and repeatedly chanted USA, USA, while vandalizing and destroying the building at the heart of America's democracy. Now, while there are comparisons because both were protests, The major difference is that the Black Lives Matter campaign is in response to injustice, not completely undermining American democracy. We will now be moving on to the sports portion of our broadcast. Tonight's story has to deal with soccer. Chapecoense, a Brazilian soccer team, just was promoted back into Brazil's top division. You may remember them from the news because on November 28, 2016, the plane carrying the club's players and staff, as well as journalists, crashed near Medellin, Colombia, where the team was heading due to play in the Copa Sudamericana final first leg against Atlético Nacional, killing 71 of the 77 people on board. The team was flying from Santa Cruz de la Sierra in Bolivia to Colombia when it crashed into a hillside. 19 players and 19 staff were killed. Just 3 players survived. Next up, we have our weather segment. Today we are dealing with Mozambique. As another severe tropical storm hits Mozambique, people are still struggling to rebuild the lives destroyed by 2019 Cyclone Idai. Cyclone Idai killed more than 1,000 people and devastated Beira, a sprawling port city of 500,000 people built on a delta in the Mozambique Channel on the east coast of Africa. Then came days of heavy rain and finally flooding. Nearly 2 years later, Mozambique is still trying to rebuild.
As far as the eye can see, homes in this Mozambique port city of Beira are now flattened, flooded, and covered in mud and debris.
Once again, I'm Ava Smith, and this has been RBC Student News. We hope to see you tune in again next week and every week after that for updates on international and national news stories. Thanks. See you next week.